It's been quite a while since the GH5 has been released, and lately there have been quite many rumors on an upcoming GH6, so I thought it would be a good idea to share my personal thoughts and my wish list for the Panasonic Lumix GH6. Enjoy! There's honestly not a lot that I don't like about the GH5. I've been using this camera for around 3 years now, and it has never let me down, which is the most important thing for me. And yes, I know there's that contrast autofocus system that doesn't work very well in videos, but I actually really enjoy it for photography. In some scenarios, I wish there was a little less noise, but then again, I wasn't carrying any huge f1.2 full-frame prime lenses, but these comparatively small and light micro four thirds lenses instead, which is just a pleasure to shoot with, especially if you're traveling a lot. I am well aware of the pros and cons of the micro four thirds system, and right now I feel like there's still enough to hold on to it. This might change in the future though, and if Panasonic and Olympus/JIP want to survive, we need some real innovation here. Full-frame cameras become smaller and smaller and offer lightweight prime lenses at an affordable price already. The gap between smartphones and cameras gets smaller and smaller too, which might eventually kill small format systems like micro four thirds in the long run. Although this is a wish list for a GH6, I don't really care about the actual name or camera manufacturer that comes up with this camera, as long as it happens all together. Let's talk about the sensor first. The GH5's dynamic range is not the best compared to most other current options on the market, but it isn't too bad either. I would love to see dual native ISO to get some better dynamic range at that high ISOs though. A higher resolution like 8K definitely has its benefits, but I'm personally not a big fan of it. 8K resolution in such a small sensor will likely lead to an even worse low light performance, and filming without any ND filters at 180 degrees might not be an option because of diffraction. Whenever I'm shooting at 180 degrees in bright sunlight with my GH5 and a closed down aperture, I always notice the impact of diffraction on the image, and the overall sharpness of the image gets pretty bad. If this gets even worse with a higher megapixel sensor, shooting without any ND filters at 180 degrees will be pretty much impossible. But there might be a solution to that problem: organic sensor technology. And Panasonic has actually already announced that this is something they want to implement in their Lumix lineup in the future. But since it wasn't their first priority, and we haven't seen any cameras with organic sensors so far, this one might not make it into the GH6. Still, it would be great to have an organic sensor because it is essentially a global shutter with an electronic ND filter inside of the sensor. This technology has quite many benefits. First off, the GH6 could get rid of the mechanical shutter inside of the camera and free up some space for a cooling solution that might be necessary for the organic sensor that will likely produce more heat than the old one. On top of that, the global shutter will eliminate the rolling shutter or so-called jello effect forever. Diffraction would also no longer be a problem in most scenarios because you won't need any screw-on ND filters for your lenses and can always achieve perfect exposure using the stepless electronic ND filters straight in the camera. This is achieved by varying application of voltage to the photoconductive film that sits on top of the CMOS sensor. You'll essentially always be able to shoot as wide open as you want, and this will not only be great for filmmaking, but for long exposure photography too. Still, going above about f4.9 when you're shooting landscapes or macros, for example, might no longer be an option with such a high megapixel sensor because of diffraction. Nonetheless, going for 8K would only really make sense if they implement that organic sensor technology in the GH6 to at least get rid of the disadvantages such a high megapixel count in such a small sensor comes with. From what we know so far, Panasonic has also said that this organic sensor will add about 2 stops of additional dynamic range. This organic sensor technology sounds absolutely fantastic if you ask me, and this is probably my number 1 on this wish list because it just checks so many necessary boxes for both photography and videography. Next, let's talk about the IBIS system. It's an absolutely outstanding system, so don't get me wrong here, but they need to fix that weird wide angle wobble you get if you shoot at less than about 24mm full frame equivalent. IBIS has made my life so much easier on the GH5, and I wish the GH5S also had IBIS, but I get it. IBIS creates heat as well and can sometimes lead to problems even when it's deactivated. Still, there are many situations where a gimbal is just inappropriate and lens OIS is not enough to get rid of the shakiness. The next topic I'd like to talk about is autofocus. You've been waiting for this one, I know it. It's no secret that the DFD contrast autofocus is not the best solution for continuous autofocus tracking in both videos and fast-paced action or wildlife photography. Additional processing power will definitely make the system faster in the future, but this won't be the solution to the problem. You will still see the hunting, which can be quite distracting in videos. I'm sure they'll get there for photography, but I just don't see that system working for videos. Now, I'm not saying that face detect autofocus is perfect. It also has some issues like banding and loss of light. It's been quite a while already, but if I remember correctly, there has been a rumor on time of flight sensor technology, which would essentially include a laser that calculates the distance to a certain subject. This would be perfect for everything that's not too far away. If you face your camera to the sky, there might still be issues, but that's where contrast AF could come in again and work in a hybrid system in conjunction with the time of flight technology. I am no engineer, so I'm not sure whether this is technically even possible without making the camera any bigger to include that laser, but I'd honestly love to see some innovation here for the autofocus system. Now, we haven't talked about codecs and frame rate so far, so let's continue with that next. As I said, I don't really care about 8K, but having 4K 120 at 10-bit 422 would be very nice indeed. And since most of Panasonic's new cameras have RAW over HDMI, I'd love to see that as a feature as well. To further differentiate themselves from the full-frame market though, internal RAW video would definitely help. Having multiple codecs for long GOP and all intra-recording options would be nice too. And while we're on that topic, I really hope that they don't take any of the great features the GH5 had away. Things like full-sized HDMI, waveform monitor and vector scope, shutter angle, the flip-out screen, dual card slots, anamorphic and full pixel readout for an additional crop when you need it would be awesome in the GH6 too. If there's one thing that's missing to nail your exposure even more easily, then it's false color. And I really wish you could punch into your image while recording to get a better idea of your focus, especially when you're focusing manually. I'd also love to see a little more intuitive zebra controls, because right now you have to go deep into the menu to adjust the settings for your zebras. You can, however, use the menu sidebar to switch between zebras 1, 2, and deactivate them altogether. Having another option in the quick menu and multiple zebras for both your skin tones and blown out highlights facing different directions would be so great. And another thing that has always bothered me with the GH5 is the fact that you can't see the exact color temperature and tint adjustment when you're using the custom white balance feature. This would be really helpful to identify any color cast that some filters produce to adjust your other white balance presets to that tint accordingly. As it is right now though, you have to use a white balance profile like Sunny for example, then take a few shots outside with a filter on, put it in DaVinci Resolve and check the tint using a vector scope for example. The vector scope on the GH5 ain't bad, but it's just too small to see those very fine details. But then again, in most cases you can probably just fix that small tint in post and focus on things that are more important. I just thought that I'd throw this one in as well because I haven't heard about it anywhere else so far and there should always be some more room for improvement. By the way, the quick menu is probably one of my favorite things about Lumix cameras. If they can make it even a tiny little bit better on the GH6, that camera will blow everything else out of the water. Switching between multiple frame rates, resolutions and codecs is quite easy on the GH5. But if you have set your camera to PAL, you won't be able to shoot 4K at 60 frames without sacrificing your audio and autofocus. To do that, you have to go to the menu, switch to NTSC, restart your camera, and only then you'll be able to shoot 4K at 60 frames per second with audio and autofocus. There is an option for high frame rate recordings on the GH5, but it only has 100 megabits per second instead of 150 megabits per second. And as I said, there's no audio and no autofocus in that mode. This is really a bummer, and I wish to see more frame rate options for both PAL and NTSC in the future. Right now, I use a wired remote control to start and stop most of my recordings. Sometimes I also use the Android app, which works pretty well without any cables. Thinking back about my old Canon EOS 600D though, I was able to use a wireless remote control to focus as well as start and stop my recordings, and I really missed that feature because the remote control was really small, had no cable, and was overall just very easy to use. The Panasonic Image app is also great for that, but connecting to the camera can sometimes take a while because it won't always recognize the camera immediately. As you can see, we went pretty deep into some details here, and I'm pretty sure they won't be able to fix all of these issues in the upcoming GH6. But as I have repeated myself many times, they need to at least offer a few features that are exclusive for Micro Four Thirds to make the system worthwhile in the long run. Panasonic's current S5 full-frame camera plus 20-60mm f3.5 to f5.6 is actually even smaller than the GH5 plus 10-25mm f1.7. and is even less in weight. Now, of course, it's not quite the same in terms of aperture, but the lens is 350 grams lighter and offers 10 additional millimeters on the long end. If they'll come up with more full-frame lens options like these that are as light as Micro Four Thirds and offer the same amount of flexibility, then why should anybody stick with that system? I don't know. I mean, I'm still quite happy with the GH5, and I love to talk about new gear and stuff, but at the same time, I'm a firm believer that your camera gear is not as important as your skills, which is why I'd like to introduce you to the Content Creator Circle, which is a course platform that I'm currently working on that will teach you everything you need to know to start your own business as a creator. If you're interested in that, you can find more information about CCC in the video description. But that's it from me, guys. Remember that this is my personal wish list for the GH6. I am not predicting anything here, and I have no affiliation with any of the camera manufacturers I've talked about in this video, at least at this point of time. So I am just as clueless as you guys probably are. But I still thought it would be kind of interesting to talk about the few things they could improve upon in the upcoming GH6. If it had all of these features, it would essentially be the perfect camera for many people, including myself. But is there anything that I have missed or you would like to see in the upcoming GH6? Please let me know in the comments down below. I'd really love to hear what you guys think. Other than that, I really hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.